Hello everyone, my name is Garry Wills. I'm here presenting another video in support of the publication of my book Wellington and Bay. In episode 6 I presented scenario 1, a French morning attack, and that went against history as the Allies failed to blow up the bridge. So I thought it was worth another go at the same scenario, showing the attack of the French 5th Division on the morning of the 25th of October 1812. Yes, let's hope the Allies managed to blow the bridge this time. Uh, Failures were not uncommon during the Peninsula War. Again, as in episode 6, I have left a lot of the introductory slides showing the campaign background, the terrain, and the orders of battle the same as they were in previous episodes, so you might want to fast forward past those. This slide shows the campaign map with the British having retired from Burgos through Torquemada, where both armies took a lot of pleasure from the local wine, through to Magas, and then the British themselves formed a line on the Carrion from Palencia in the north through Villamuriel de Crato to Duenas on the Puisega. The French, by the evening of the 24th of October, had got as far as Magas in the centre of the map. And the following morning, on the 25th, Maucune, who was in charge of both his divisions and Gauthier's division, was sent as the advance guard. He himself went to Villamuriel de Crato via Calabazanos, while Gautier attacked the bridge at Tariego. This is the battlefield that we'll be seeing in 15 mil scale in a few moments, and there are several points of interest. The village itself features a quite substantial church, but other than that, at the time had only about 100 houses. It was on the main carriage road from Palencia to Duenas, and the other main habitation was the monastery at Calabazanos. In terms of crossing the river, that was only possible at the two fords marked here and the bridge. The weather had been quite bad in the preceding week with a lot of rain, so the river was running fast and deep. The other big feature of the battlefield, second only to the river, is the dry Canal de Castilla, which was under construction when the war broke out, and so consequently was unfinished and was empty. It's a significant feature such that men standing in the bottom of the canal can't see out, so it's quite an obstacle. Another feature of the battlefield were these wine vaults or bodegas, which created some rough ground on the western side of the canal. These vaults were quite extensive excavations. Some are reported to have had 100 steps underground, and basically they provided rough ground for skirmishers to defend. And the other feature of significance on the battlefield was the high ground. It rose from about 715 meters by the river up to 800 meters. Orders of battle for the day. The Allied force constituted the 5th Anglo-Portuguese division, and they were under some new commanders. So Major General John Oswald arrived that morning to take command. Edward Barnes wasn't officially in command of the brigade for another 2 days, but had arrived just in time to take part in the battle. The the division was supported by a brigade of the Galician Army of Spain, the Sixth Army. So all told, they had 5,500 men with 6 guns. The French were comprised of the 5th Division of the Army of Portugal, led by General Division Maucune. This was the division beaten by the 5th Anglo-Portuguese Division at Salamanca just a few months earlier. The division comprised 2 brigades, each of 2 regiments, each of 2 battalions, and they also had 5 foot guns in support. Also supporting the division were the Light Cavalry Brigade of Defos, which comprised 6 squadrons of light cavalry plus a small detachment of a further regiment. This brigade was actually Curto's brigade, who was currently away commanding the division. The whole force was supported by Suham's 1st Reserve Horse Artillery Company and with 5 guns. So in total, the French had just under 6,000 men and 10 guns. Okay, so as regards to game rules, I'm using Black Powder 2nd edition, but I have always used 15mm figures, and therefore I use the centimetre scale where all distances in the rules are measured in centimetres rather than inches. I also always use the special rule that was introduced in Last Argument of Kings and is now adopted in Clash of Eagles from the Napoleonic period, wherein you can't fire if the unit has moved more than once in a turn. In Black Powder 2, there are several versions of divisional generals that you can use, and although it's not my favourite, I chose to use the divisional generals giving re-rolls as an option this time round. I've used the staff ratings in order to reflect the way the generals behaved on the day. So the best example of this is Spry, whose brigade was left in the canal or thereabouts throughout the day and really didn't take part in the action. So he has a very low staff rating to make it hard for him to be moved. Another special feature of the game is that the wine harvest had just been brought in to the village and to the wine cellars, and so neither side wanted to allow their troops into the buildings in the village, in either of the villages, so they can't be garrisoned under the rules I'm using for the game. Finally, I use skirmishers slightly different from the way they're represented in the rulebook in order to better reflect their dispersion and usual organisation. Differently. This shows how I represent skirmishers. I use these 6cm movement trays which show the correct frontage and depth for a deployed skirmish company. So a French company of 4 figures or 130 men in this would have 2 of these bases. And I also give skirmishers light cover if they've moved less than 6 centimetres to represent the effect of the greater dispersion than is allowed for in the rules. So this scenario lasts about 3 hours or 12 game turns from 9 AM, and the French move first. The victory conditions for both sides are fairly straightforward. For the French, they must get 1 or more of their 2 brigades across the river with more than half their units intact, and that will give them the victory. And for the Allies, they have a simple task of just preventing the French fulfilling their own victory conditions in order to win. A special feature of this scenario involves the destruction of the bridge at Villamuriel. What Wellington hoped to do is protect his line behind the Carrion and the Puisaga rivers by destroying the bridges at Peninsula, at Villamuriel and at Tariego near Duenas. and the idea was that engineers were sent overnight previously to prepare the bridges for demolition. So at Villamuriel we needed a mechanism in order to reflect this process, and the way I chose to do it is with a simple die roll. To initiate the detonation of the mine, the British player rolls a d6. The score on the die will determine when exactly the detonation of the mine would take place. 4 plus, 4, 5 or 6, it will take place immediately. On a score of 2 or 3, it takes place at the beginning of the subsequent move, and on a score of 1, poorest result, it would take place the move after next. And this gives some tension into the whole process and reflects the last minute nature of the preparation for the bridge, about which the bridge's demolition, about which Wellington was very nervous, as reported by several eyewitnesses. So once the detonation has been initiated, the British and Allied player throws another d6, and on a score of 1, the mine is deemed to have failed and the bridge remains intact, and there is only one attempt allowed in this regard. So overall, the destruction of the bridge can be varied in terms of both timing, when it happens, and also whether it happened at all, which reflects the uncertainties around this activity during the Peninsular War. So finally, if the attempt to detonate the mine is successful, the bridge is destroyed, and any unit on the bridge at the time of the explosion is either broken in black powder or dispersed in general de brigade and removed from play. So this photograph shows the deployment of the troops on the table at the beginning of the game. You can see in the top left-hand part of the photograph the arriving French division under Maucune, and manning the defences in the village and along the river is the Anglo-Portuguese and Spanish troops. This photograph shows the French troops in close-up. Highlighted here are Darmo's 1st Brigade of the 15th Ligne and the 66th Ligne, the 15th on the left as we look at them, with their separated out voltigeurs and grenadiers forming the central columns. And this highlights Montfort's brigade of the 82nd and 86th Ligne, following along in the same sort of order. Along the road are the divisional artillery assets led by Blanzat, and the horse artillery from the Army Reserve is taking the lead, obviously followed by Maucune's own foot battery unit. And this final base is Maucune with his staff officers, his chief of staff, an ADC and his engineering officer. At the bridge itself, awaiting the French, were just the combined light companies of the 5th Anglo-Portuguese Division. So to the right of the bridge, as we looked at it, were the skirmishers of, or the light companies of Barnes's brigade, including Sergeant or then Corporal James Hale. While across the river were the light companies of Pringle's own brigade, which also included, as did Barnes's brigade, a company of the Brunswick Earls Light Infantry. On a mound just outside the village was Lawson's company, brigade rather, of the Royal Artillery, where they had a good view and could cover the bridge with ease. Also waiting covered by the same mound was the 1st 9th Foot Hale's parent battalion, in column, ready to pounce on any French that ventured across the bridge. Meanwhile, in the village street, also covered by the buildings, was the 2nd Battalion of the 4th Foot, also in column, waiting to attack any French that crossed the river. Behind the village, in the dry canal bed, were the rest of Pringle's brigade, the 1st Battalion 4th Foot and the 2nd Battalions of the 30th Foot and the 44th Foot. They were there, sheltered from any French artillery fire. Also in the canal were Barnes's other 2 battalions, the 1st and 2nd Battalion of the 38th Foot, who were also sheltering in the canal. The other battalion I haven't mentioned, the 3rd 1st Foot, had been sent to Palencia to cover the destruction of the bridges there. Behind all of those units, up on the hills, were on the extreme Allied left, was the brigade of Lignon, with his 2 battalions of relatively newly raised Spanish infantry. On the other flank, in amongst the woods near the ford at Calabazanos, were the Caçadores, commanded by Major Dudley Hill, the Caçadores number 8. They were accompanied by 1 company of the 9th Foot also. As I mentioned earlier, behind them in the canal, dry canal bed, were the rest of Spry's brigade, the 3rd Regiment and the 15th Regiment Line Infantry, 2 battalions each. So now, having shown you the setup, I'm going to take you through each of the 12 turns with 2 sets of photographs for each turn. The situation at the end of the French turn, and followed by the situation at the end of the Allied turn. And in this photograph you can see that Maucune has made a small move forward with his artillery, who, unlike on the actual day, have only got 1 move forward along the road, despite all the advantages they have. Meanwhile, Darnold, commanding the 1st Brigade of Maucune's division, signally failed to deploy any of his skirmishers as planned, having failed his command test. So moving on to the end of Allied turn 1, pretty much a non-event, because the Allies didn't need to move and the French were not yet in range of their weapons. Moving now to the end of French turn 2, Maucune has been a bit more successful with his artillery this time, advancing the foot artillery along the road, and the horse artillery, obviously moving faster, has managed to get forward and deploy ready to fire. And this time Darnold managed to get one of his combined battalions of Grenadiers and Voltigeurs forward to support the artillery and engage the British light infantry. Meanwhile, the chef de battalion, Isambard, has managed to bring forward the other 2 combined battalions of Grenadiers and Voltigeurs from the 1st Brigade of Maucune's division towards the ford at Calabazanos in order to engage the Caçadores that occupied the ford and the mill nearby. So we're now at the end of Allied turn 2, and during this turn Lawson's Royal Artillery Brigade opened fire on the French artillery to their front without any benefit. Likewise, Major Hill's 8th Caçadores, deployed at the ford, opened fire on the approaching French light infantry and grenadiers. Now at the end of French turn 3, the skirmishers, French skirmishers, have managed to deploy and started to engage the British and Brunswick skirmishers to their front, and also the rest of the French artillery, the foot guns of the division, divisional artillery, managed to deploy in order to engage Lawson. Covering that deployment, the French horse artillery engaged Lawson's brigade and caused a casualty and disorder in their first real volley. Meanwhile, at the ford at Calabazanos, Chef de Battalion Isambard deployed his men to start the long skirmish battle with the Hill's 8th Caçadores and a small party of the 9th Foot across the other side of the river. However, first blood here at the end of Allied Turn 3 went to the Caçadores, who managed to disorder both the French battalions of skirmishers. Meanwhile, at the bridge, the skirmishing was less decisive. Also, at the end of Allied Turn 3, Lawson's brigade continues its battle against superior numbers of French artillery. Moving on to the end of French Turn 4, the French skirmishers have engaged their British and Allied opponents and managed to disorder them. Also, on French Turn 4, the French artillery managed to get a second casualty on one half of Lawson's brigade, shaking them and disordering them. However, at Calabazanos, the French skirmishers were less successful in causing any damage on their opponents. At the end of Allied Turn 4, so this is about 10 o'clock in the morning, Pringle and Oswald decided that it was probably time to blow the bridge, and withdrew their skirmishers to the Allied side of the river. However, the dice roll for determining whether the bridge was ready for demolition gave the worst possible result, that the engineer felt it wouldn't be ready for demolition until the end of the move after next. So hence the red dice of doom has appeared with the numerals 2 on it. Meanwhile, at Calabazanos, the Caçadores have managed again to cause some disorder amongst their French opponents. We've now moved on to the end of French Turn 5, and at Calabazanos the French have managed to return the favour and cause some disorder again amongst the Caçadores. Meanwhile, at the bridge, the French skirmishers have moved closer so they can re-engage with their opponents on the other side of the river. Now, at the end of Allied Turn 5, we're now counting down till the bridge is ready for demolition, and now the red dice of doom shows only 1, so it's getting closer. And at this point in the proceedings, Wellington arrives with his staff and passes through the village on his way to the bridge. Meanwhile, at Calabazanos, the skirmishing stalemate continues, although the Caçadores will be happy that they're keeping at bay twice their own numbers in French skirmish. Moving on to the end of French Turn 6, now getting towards the halfway point in the game, the French skirmishers at the bridge caused a casualty on Pringle's light infantry battalion, if you can call it that, after they've crossed to the other side of the river. Meanwhile, Darnold brings forward the 4 battalions of the 1st Brigade of the 5th Division, those of the 15th and 66th Ligne, in order to assault the bridge. And at Calabazanos, the French skirmishers caused more disorder amongst the defending Caçadores. At the end of Allied Turn 6, Wellington arrives to meet with Oswald and Pringle commanding the Anglo-Portuguese 5th Division, and he, as he did in the real battle, was nervously inquiring as to why the bridge wasn't yet blown. and it proved he was right to be nervous. As I explained earlier, having determined to detonate the mine, the British Allied player rolls a d6, and anything but a 1 results in the mine detonating properly and the bridge being destroyed. Unfortunately, for the second game in a row, the dice score was a 1, so the bridge was not destroyed. Meanwhile, at Calabazanos, the stalemate amongst the skirmishers continues. Moving forward to the end of French turn 7, Maucune and Arnold have managed to bring forward the 4 battalions of the 1st Brigade to prepare for assaulting the bridge. At Calabazanos, the French skirmishers again managed to cause some disorder amongst the Portuguese caçadores. We're now at the end of Allied turn 7, and at Calabazanos again the skirmishing has continued without much effect, this time not helped by the fact that the elite status of the Portuguese caçadores didn't result in their disorder being removed. Following the failure to blow the bridge, Pringle was left with no alternative to try and defend it against the oncoming French, and he started by moving forward the first 9th foot. Unfortunately, they only got 1 move in their command test. However, even though they were further away, Pringle's other battalions, the 1st, 4th foot, and the combined battalion of the 2nd 30th and the 2nd 44th, did manage to get a move so they could move out of the canal and come to the aid of the rest of the brigade. Also, the Union, despite his low staff rating of 7, managed to get his brigade to move forward, albeit only 1 move, down the slopes from the hills above Villamuriel. So we're now at the end of French turn 8, and at this moment the French were able to try to storm the bridge, and you can see here the 1st Battalion of the 15th Ligne is leading the way across the bridge, supported by its 2nd Battalion and the 4th and 6th Battalions of the 66th Ligne. Also at the end of French turn 8, the artillery have moved forward a move to get a bit closer, shorten range to the Allied positions in support of the advancing French infantry. The ford at Calabazanos, the skirmishing continued, again causing some disorder on the Portuguese caçadores. Also on this turn, Montfort, commanding the 2nd Brigade of the 5th Division, tried to move his brigade forward in support of the rest of the division. Unfortunately, only managed to blunder and marched sideways towards the table's edge. So now we're at the end of Allied turn 8, and this is a significant turn because despite what was happening at this bridge, Wellington received news that the bridges at Palencia had been taken by the French, and that there was a chance that Foy would roll up the whole of the position on the carry-on. So he left with his staff to visit there and check what was going on, and he ordered Oswald to take the 1st Brigade of the 5th Anglo-Portuguese Division, comprising of Barnes' 2 battalions of the 1st and 2nd 38th Foot, plus a battalion from Pringle's brigade, the 2nd 4th Foot, to up onto the hills towards Palencia, in the intention of driving Foy back. On the way they would have met Barnes' other brigade, the 3rd Battalion of the 1st Foot, which had been sent first thing in the morning to help cover the destructions and therefore unsuccessful destruction of the bridges at Palencia. So these circles highlight the sudden gaps that have appeared which left Pringle with his own brigade in charge of the defence of the position at Villamuriel. Because the bridge has not been blown, I allowed Pringle to keep the 2nd Battalion of the 4th Foot, which you can see here just emerging from the village, to reinforce his own men. At the bridge, the skirmishers retired so that they wouldn't have to evade their charging French columns and still be able to engage the other French columns that were advancing in support. Now then, in order to receive the French attack, Pringle sent forward the 1st 9th Foot, and he required them to advance and then form line. Unfortunately, they only got one more move, so they ended up in column at the foot of the bridge. Meanwhile, Pringle also ordered the 2nd Battalion, the 4th Foot, to move out of the village, ready to try and take any French excursion away from the bridge in the flank. Pringle's final order was to his other 2 battalions, who ended up with an excellent command role and got 3 moves, were able to get themselves into close support behind the 1st 9th and the skirmish square. Meanwhile, at Calabazanos, the skirmishing continued without result. In the movement phase, at the end of French turn 9, Maucune's managed to get the 1st 15th to charge across the remainder of the bridge into the 1st 9th Foot. In turn 9, Montfort's been more successful, bringing the rest of the division, his own brigade, forward in support of the attack on the bridge. And again, back at the bridge, in the shooting phase, the French artillery caused a casualty and some disorder on the 2nd 4th Foot as it emerged from the village. In the close combat phase at the bridge, the large 1st Battalion of the 15th, not surprisingly, beat the smaller 1st 9th and inflicted enough casualties on them to shake them. And in the break test, the 1st 9th were forced to withdraw a move with the 1st 15th in hot pursuit. Meanwhile, at Calabazanos, the French skirmishers again managed to disorder the defending Caçadores. We now move forward to the end of Allied turn 9, and at the bridge, the disorder caused to the 2nd 4th Foot is significant, as they're not an elite battalion. They're the least reliable of the British battalion, so they weren't able to rally off the disorder and could only watch as the combat went on in front of them. However, Lawson's artillery on the mound could engage the French infantry columns and quickly shook the 6th Battalion of the 66th Ligne. So the last act of Allied turn 9 was the close combat between the 1st 15th and the 1st 9th. And as you might imagine, there was only really one result. The 1st 9th lost the close combat, and in the break test they were also broken, and so were removed from play. As a follow-up move, as allowed under the rules, the 1st 15th deployed into line, ready to engage the rest of Pringle's infantry. Meanwhile, at Calabazanos, the skirmishing continued without result. So we now move forward to the end of French turn 10, and the first move was the 4th Battalion of the 66th Ligne, led by Colonel Béchard, managed to find the ford next to the bridge and get across to support, to advance in support of the 1st 15. While we're on this photo, jumping ahead to the shooting phase, the the French artillery, again firing at the unfortunate 2nd Battalion 4th Foot, managed to score another casualty and to shake them. Back in the command phase, Darnold, conscious of the importance of keeping his brigade together, managed to rally one of the casualties off the 6th 66th. Meanwhile, Montfort slowly, and I emphasise slowly, managed to move his brigade closer to the bridge in support of Darnold's brigade. And unsurprisingly, at the end of French turn 10, the skirmishing at the ford at Calabazanos continued unabated. We're now at the end of Allied turn 10, and Lignon successfully managed to move his brigade one more move closer to the action, just near the canal. Also, in Allied turn 10, the 2nd Battalion, the 4th Foot, managed to advance closer to the bridge in order to engage the French reinforcements. Meanwhile, Lawson's brigade on the mound found themselves in a great position to fire canister into the 1st Battalion of the 15th Ligne as it tried to engage the Allied infantry. And they ended up getting a couple of casualties and being disordered as a result of the combined fire. The 2nd, 4th in the shooting phase managed to cause casualty on the 4th Battalion of the 66th Foot as they advanced towards the British line. Meanwhile, at Calabazanos, the skirmishing continued, and this time it was the turn of the Allies to disorder some of the French skirmishers. We're now at the end of French turn 11, and during this turn the 4th Battalion, the 65th Ligne, charged home on the 2nd Battalion, the 30th 2nd Battalion of 44th Foot. They were disordered by the closing fire. Meanwhile, at the bridge, the 2nd Battalion, 15th Ligne, charged into the already shaken 2nd Battalion, 4th Foot. And the final battalion of Darnold's 1st Brigade, that of the 6th 66th Ligne, got across the bridge in support of their 4th Battalion and the 1st Battalion, 15th Ligne. On the right flank, the skirmishers, the French skirmishers, moved forward to engage their British and Allied counterparts. In the shooting phase, the French artillery were able to engage Lawson's brigade and broke one of the 2 component units, and causing another casualty on the other unit. So it was a great turn of French artillery shooting in support of their infantry. And at Calabazanos there was finally a good result for the French, who despite the disorder managed to score 2 casualties on the first half, first wing of the Caçadores, shaking them and disordering them. Moving forward to the end of Allied turn 11, the turn started inauspiciously for the Allies, with Lignon being unsuccessful in getting his brigade much further forward. And at the bridge, although the 2nd, 4th had gallantly fended off the 2nd, 15th Ligne and forced them into a disordered line in the first round of combat, they were beaten in their own round of combat and were broken. However, the combat between the 4th 66th Ligne and the combined battalion, the 2nd 30th and the 2nd 44th, was much more successful with the British, and the 4th Battalion, the 66th Ligne, was broken as a result of losing the combat. Meanwhile, in the centre, the combination of the artillery fire from Lawson's brigade, or what was left of it, and the 1st Foot had managed to create enough casualties, 4 casualties, to shake the 1st Battalion of the 15th Ligne. At Calabazanos, significantly, Dudley Hill had proved unable to rally one of the casualties off his shaken wing. Again, we're now at the end of French turn 12, the last turn of the scenario for the French. The skirmishers at the ford were more successful, causing another casualty on the Caçadores, and in the resulting break test, they were forced to retire back away from the river. And here's a clearer shot of the retired Caçadores as they emerge from the trees onto the road. In the centre, the 2nd Battalion of the 15th Ligne, following on from their success against the 2nd 4th Foot, rallied off their disorder and then attempted to charge Lawson's remaining artillery. Unfortunately, they were broken by the resulting closing fire and were removed from the game. Darnold also at this point managed to rally off one of the casualties off the 1st of the battalion of the 15th Ligne in order to keep the brigade from becoming broken. Back in the movement phase of French turn 12, Montfort at last got a good result from his command phase and got his brigade across the river via the bridge and the ford in support of the 1st Brigade. Montfort's leading battalion, the 1st 86th Ligne, went a bit further than that. They had enough movement to charge into Lawson's artillery and broke them following the very brief melee, and then pursued over the mount. The 6th Battalion of the 66th Ligne had charged into the combined battalion of the 2nd 30th and 2nd 44th Foot and had broken them in the ensuing close combat, despite becoming shaken themselves. And this had some dramatic consequences. Having lost the melee and been broken, it meant that the supporting units also had to take break tests, and unfortunately for the Allies, the 1st 4th Foot failed their break test and were removed from play. And likewise, on the other flank, Pringle's skirmisher battalion, or light company battalion, also failed the break test and was removed from play. At this point, it was obvious there was no point in continuing on with the game and playing out Allied turn 12, the last turn of the scenario. And a brief recap of the victory conditions it shows why. In this case, the failure to destroy the bridge had resulted in not one but both of the French brigades crossing the river, and complete failure on the part of the Allies to stop them. So that's where the game ended, with a French win, in this case by a resounding margin. So that's the end of this scenario. I hope you enjoyed it. So if you did, like and subscribe, as they always say on these things. But more importantly, if you're interested at all in the battle, please look out for my book Wellington at Bay, which is published by Hellion and can be found on their website. It has been very positively reviewed on a well-known book-selling site, receiving 5-star reviews. I will be making more of these videos, so look out for them in future. Thank you very much. Goodbye.